Welcome everyone. We might get proceedings underway. Thank you for coming along this evening. My name is Ross Daley. I'm the CEO of Solutions and Engineering. We're a compliance, education and advisory service for the strata industry, operating on the east coast of Australia and servicing the ACT and New Zealand. We've been in business for in excess of 10 years, and the great thing for us is we see the strata industry only strengthening in Australia, and the number of people that we've got along here this evening midweek to come to this event is perhaps a strong indicator of how much interest there is in issues that are affecting the strata industry. Before we get underway, I need to go through the normal housekeeping procedures of if you could check to see that your mobile phone is on silent, because we all know how embarrassing it is to have your mobile phone and watching you try to struggle to find where it is in your pocket. And so if you could make sure they're on silent, please. I should let you know that the facilities are outside the door. On the left-hand side of the stairs is the ladies, and on the right-hand side is the gents. If there's a fire, there'll be an evacuation siren. We do have a fire engineer on the panel, so his nose will be well attuned to the smell of smoke. That's right, he does part of the degree qualification that you can smell smoke. But the evacuation is follow the green exit signs and up the stairs, so let's hope that's not a problem. We might get things underway. I'll start by introducing the panel of experts that I note we haven't actually addressed gender equity when it comes to the panel, but that's not deliberate. There are lots of very good women that work in the strata industry. It's just that we haven't got any of them sitting up the front of here this evening, so that's not deliberate. First of all is Peter Berney, who is the National Business Development Manager for Solutions and Engineering, the organisation that I lead. Peter has had many more years of experience in the strata industry than I have. Not that he's older than me, but he's just been in the strata industry for much longer than I have. Next to Peter is Rod Tancred. Rod Tancred is from BCB Insurance Brokers. He gets almost the hardest questions on the evening because he's here because he's got the most knowledge of the insurance industry, and there may well be people in the room this evening concerned about what might happen with their premiums if their buildings are affected by defects and the aluminium composite panel that many people may have questions about this evening. Next to Rod, we've got Colin Grace, who is from Grace Lawyers. Colin is, I think, referred to as an industry icon. I'm not sure if that's because he knows lots or that he's been around for a long time, but he is referred to as an industry icon. Next to Colin is Andrew Brennan, who has got all of the answers because he's the fire engineer. So all of the panellists know if they can't answer the question, they just defer to Andrew. So this is the second one of these events that Andrew's come along to. So he didn't get beat up too much at the first one. So hopefully the crowd will be easy on you tonight, Andrew. Next to Andrew is Erik Adriaanse.
You've got it.
Okay, thank you. Who is the COO of Strata Community Association nationally, and also a very experienced strata industry professional. Next to Erik is Rob Craven, who is the president of the industry body SCA ACT. Erik's had almost 10 years experience working in the strata industry, so he's here in the interests of strata. And last but not least is Craig Simmons, who's the Chief Operating Officer at the ACT Environment Planning Sustainability Development Directorate. Have we got that correct, Craig? Yep. Okay, that's good. So Craig is here to provide a public sector government response approach to how people are going to get answers from the government. And I will say Craig is not here to answer all of the questions with regards to responsibility, but he is here to provide a different perspective to the issues. So at the end of the questions that we've got, there will be an opportunity for audience participation with questions and answers. We understand that we may not have all of the answers this evening, but it is about trying to provide people with as much information as possible so they can make informed decisions. So let's get the show on the road. I just might ask all of the panellists to start with, how concerned should we be about building defects at the moment? So who wants to go first, Peter?
Yeah, I'll take this one first, guys, is that right? Well, I think maybe if we have a show of hands to start with, if you're concerned about your buildings, I think that's a good indicator there, the number of hands that go up. I suppose this comes down to the growth we've had on the east coast of Australia, particularly the east coast. There's been a rush to develop properties. There's been the attitude of trying to keep prices down to attract purchasers. Consequently, that gives us, or it brings us to where we are today with defects in buildings. And there was one recent survey where owners voted 85% of their buildings had defects, which is quite staggering when you think about it.
But they were cheap to buy, were they?
Sorry?
But they were cheap to buy, were they?
Yes.
I'll cover up on that from an insurance perspective, obviously. And defects is not just restricted to cladding. There's obviously water problems in buildings. We have problems with glass, imported glass exploding off balconies. We have the problem with plastic housing, I'm not sure what we call it, but around electrical wiring in buildings that's been imported from China that breaks down and exposes the wiring. So from an insurance perspective, something I'll touch on a bit later is the duty of disclosure. And if it's known in the building, be concerned and definitely disclose it. So.
See we're going along the line. I'll go on next. I'm a cynical bugger for the best of times. So unfortunately I never go to a happy meeting being a lawyer, and I'm a grudge purchase. I'll admit that straight up. So all the lawyer jokes, I've heard them and done them. Builders cannot build a bloody good building, quite frankly. What they are better at, or some are better at than others, is coming and fixing it later. If you are lucky enough to get in one with a good builder to come back and fix it, everything's fantastic. If you are unlucky and you get one where the builder is not very good, you come and talk to guys like me. So I take a very cynical approach to it, and I think that's factored in the chap over here talking about, are they cheap? No, they're not. They factor that in most construction now, that they're going to have to come back. And when I talk later on, I'll talk about New South Wales and ACT, because some people may jump across and have investments in New South Wales as well, like Queensland's close. And you'll see the differences in the legislation are not much, but the problems are exactly the same. I did a paper in London years ago and told them to be very, very careful to bring in a strata title over there for these exact reasons. They're talking about now construction defects. So, yeah, I'm cynical.
So I suppose from a fire safety perspective, requirements vary around the world. In terms of Australia, for your high-rise buildings, they're generally pretty good from the point of view. You generally have sprinkler systems and you've got automatic detection systems. In terms of the cladding systems you have on the outside, there are lots of different types of cladding. So because you've got a cladding in a building doesn't necessarily mean you've got a risk. Some claddings are a lot worse than other claddings, so it's a matter of understanding what type of cladding you have in your building and if it's a potential risk or not. So.
Just the original question, have we got a problem? We've got a huge problem. And that problem really has come to a head with the cladding issue. So the London incident and the Melbourne incident was really, it went right to the heart of safety. So living in a house or living in your unit and feeling safe. So that's really the primary consideration. And I think from this we're getting into defect land as we start to investigate cladding, and I think we're opening up a minefield. So we have got a huge problem as far as I'm concerned.
I suppose from a day-to-day strata management perspective, there's a huge spectrum of defects. You take over a brand new building, you might have lick of paint that's made its way under the door frame, and then at the other end you might have enormous water ingress issues. I mean, I think as long as the human element is involved, that defects are going to be a fact of life, but it's a question of how significant are they? It's a real test of how good your builder and developer is to see whether they'll stand by their product or walk away from it. It's a question of how much of a safety risk is it and how fixable is it. And if all of those issues rate on the positive side for apartment owners, for stakeholders, then there's no need to be hysterical about it. But if you start to look at major safety issues, huge cost, or enormous inconvenience, then I think more does need to be done by every stakeholder, the unit owners, the body corporate, the government, the developers, to address these issues before they really do unfold into a major issue.
It would be naive to say that there is not a problem with building defects, but as has been said, defects can spread across a wide range of things, from those matters which are livable to those things which are major structural defects that should have been picked up at the point of construction and weren't. So that represents where the system fails. I would say that it is not true that there are no builders who can build. There are builders who can build and build successfully and not have problems with their buildings. And there are examples of that in the city where there are buildings that are quite old that have survived, that from day one didn't have a problem. The issue about product, what the product and what differentiates a good builder and a developer from a poor one, from a consumer's perspective, is almost impossible to see. If I was to drive down Flemington Road today and see every car that I could see, by looking at the brand I could tell you what a quality car was or wasn't and what I would expect. But by the same token, I drive down those and I could not tell you from what I can see, because there is nothing that differentiates one brand from another. You would not have a clue unless you are an insider. You understand who's doing what, who built that building and why they built it, why that unit sold for 300, that 2-bedroom unit sold for 350 and that one sold for 325. They look the same. What's the difference? How do you know that we haven't been particularly good at informing consumers about what it is that makes the building, why they work the way they do, and what to look for in buildings? So, is there a problem with defects? I'll tell you the number one problem that happens is that body corporates or the owners corporations, by the time they, oftentimes for us, by the time they've realised there's a problem, it's a number of years into the build after occupancy. So it might be 4 or 5 years before things come together where we get the first, we might have a problem here. That means that we're already starting to enter the debate that the builder will give us over what's fair wear and tear. So the earlier an owners corporation gets together, the earlier they understand what it is that they've got, that makes the issue of repair and of ensuring that the builder can be held accountable and the developer have that incentive to come back and generate that. That's an important factor. Cladding is not a defect. It may be the right product in the wrong place. It could be the wrong product in the wrong place as well. There's a whole range of things that will happen here. But by any stretch of the imagination, the aluminium composite panels are not the only form of cladding which is combustible. And just remember, we've built with this product. There's another product we use quite a lot in buildings. It's quite combustible. It's known to most people as wood. It's on the outside of a lot of buildings. So it's not a thing which is unmanageable within fire engineering. Right? I'm not saying there aren't problems, but most things, it's about how the point in time at which we get to intervene and the point in time at which we can effectively do something about it.
Okay, thank you, Craig. I think that gives us a good segue to talk about composite panelling, and today's the 16th of May, the Grenfell fire, which really brought the world's attention onto the issue of the aluminium cladding, occurred 11 months ago tomorrow, and it was a tragic set of circumstances where some 80 people lost their lives, and the people who did survive lost everything. And that brought the world's attention onto the issue of aluminium composite panelling, and it's been used for years. Been used for years in the construction industry. Builders and designers like it. It's relatively cheap, it's malleable, it's easy to put up, it's light, it's relatively cheap. It's a great product to build. It's also a great product for propagating the spread of fire. So I'm just wondering from the panel whether there is an issue, should people be concerned if their building has cladding? Peter.
Well, from a fire safety perspective, I think if using the Grenfell London fire and the Lacrosse Docklands fire as examples of what fire compliance can do. You had Grenfell where there was a loss of life, 71 people died, a lot of people injured. Had issues with evacuating the spring, there was no sprinkler system, etc. Whereas you had Docklands where there was a sprinkler system that worked far better than they anticipated. There'd been false alarms of late, so they'd had evacuation practices, so they knew exactly what the drill was, and there was no loss of life. So I suppose you'd ask yourself, okay, my portfolio, my buildings that I manage, how many of them are getting these evacuation practices done on a regular basis, at least annually, and how many of the fire safety regulations are they being checked by the qualified contractor? It shows from a holistic point of view that if you're doing your basics right, then there shouldn't be an issue with life safety.
Right, insurance perspective?
Yeah, from an insurance perspective, it is a problem, but again, I'll touch on it later on. It's not a problem that can't be worked through. But the problem is obviously loss of property. If the building's cladding hasn't been disclosed to an insurer. You've got liability issues, office bearers liability problems for committees. If there's deaths or something arising out of it on the property, and that amount of cover under the general policy to cover the loss of 70 lives. So look, it is a problem, but it's certainly manageable, and I know all the insurers that we deal with certainly want to work with clients to get through it, but it's going to take some work. It's not going to go away.
Yeah, Colin, from your perspective?
From my perspective, it's about knowledge. To me, if it's bodies corporate across wherever you are, getting the knowledge of what do we have, what type of do we have it? If we have it, what type is it? Was it installed correctly? Do we have a proper fire safety measure to deal with it? We were chatting beforehand. There was another fire yesterday in Dubai, which is the 7th fire in Dubai with cladding. Every single one of them, the fire measures have kicked in. No one has lost their life, and everyone's been evacuated. So that, to me, tells me that there is a solution if we deal with it properly. And it's all about, like I said before, it's knowledge. What have we got? How do we deal with it? Is it compliant? Is it ticked off properly? Do these guys done their job well? And can they get us out of there if there is a fire? To me, that's the issue.
Yeah, so it is down to risk assessment. It's understanding what type of cladding you have in your building. It's understanding how many stairs, for example, you might have in your building. Are those stairs fire isolated? Do they discharge to a safe place? Do you have a sprinkler system in your building? Do you have a good smoke detection system in your building? Are they being well maintained? So all those things go into the mix when you're doing an assessment to see if your cladding product that's on your building is actually a risk or not, or something to be managed. So it's a matter of doing that overall assessment. So it's a holistic assessment. It's not just looking at the cladding in isolation. You got to look at the whole building and see what the positives are. You've touched on a number of buildings in Dubai. There was one building called the Torch, unfortunately. It's been torched twice. So they redid the cladding on the outside. Just when they finished doing the cladding, they went up again. But in both occasions, everyone got out safely. But again, it just shows that there is an issue, but if it can be managed properly, you reduce the risk.
I agree with Colin. It's all about knowledge, and the more knowledge is around, the more history we've got, the more that should be done about it. But I think there is a bit of a head in the sand type mentality around it, because it is all about dollars as well. It's all very well to identify a whole lot of problems in your building, but then you actually got to fix it. And once you fix it, you're going to have to spend the money, and if you spend the money, a lot of people won't be able to afford it. So it's a huge issue.
I think from a strata perspective, again, there's a lot of ties with what the other panellists have already said. I think it's pretty safe for me to speak for a majority of the industry in the ACT. There's just not a lot of knowledge about what physical environment you're building, what it is, what requirements it has, and how it operates. And Grenfell was obviously the touch paper that set all of this interest in cladding off amongst the general public. But it's worth pointing out that that was a 40, nearly 50-year-old building that had 50-year-old fire safety systems in it, and they retrofitted a modern cladding solution to the building. So that was a bit of an outlier, but it doesn't absolve modern buildings of the requirement to make sure that they understand exactly what the guys that have just spoken have been talking about. I've seen in my time in the industry, the owners corporations, the executive committees in particular, getting more involved in understanding what their obligations are in terms of having the fire evacuation plan, the emergency procedures in place, which cover a whole range of things. Making sure that they themselves, not just relying on the strata manager, but making sure that the executive committee and the owners corporation have those maintenance contracts in place to make sure that the systems they do have are working correctly. And when all of that comes together, then the risk is lessened. But there's so many individual scenarios out there that you really, as a unit owner, as a unit inhabitant, need to make sure that you personally are educated about what the risks are and what you need to do to ultimately minimise that risk to yourself.
Just for some, the National Construction Code is a life safety code. Its purpose and function is to make sure in the event that a building is under duress, that it will survive long enough for the people in it to get out of it. After that, it doesn't care what happens. So the fact if the building is completely destroyed after the fire, as long as everybody gets out, that's the success factor of the building, and that's what the code is set up to do. It focuses on that element because it's a life safety code, and that is the way it is conceived, or building codes in Australia are conceived on the same basis. And the purpose is to ensure that the occupants can get out of it when it's under any form of duress, whether that be fire, earthquake, flood, it doesn't matter. That's what it's been designed to do, that the building is capable of surviving long enough to allow evacuation to take place. So that's one of the things that they understand about what the approach when buildings are getting built, what they're being built for. In that, then it comes down to how much information how quickly an owners corporation can get together, understand what the building is, what the form of the building is, and what is, if something needs to be done, what needs to be done. Now, people can come and tell you this whole scope of things. I've seen $50,000 spent on a report that details everything that's wrong, and 90% of what's in that report is not about the building. It's not actually a matter where the legislation would deal with, because they're not actually about the building and things that went wrong in construction. They're fit and finish issues. So what we have been doing is we've written some new guides, so guides to maintenance, guides to new owners, guides to purchasing, that are much simpler than what government normally does, to make it easy so people can actually understand what we've written about. So we've been working with the Owners Corporation Network and some other people around the town to actually build better information so that people, prior to purchase, once they take occupancy, and then in terms of the maintenance, so there is clearer, better information about these issues going forward, because it's a rapidly expanding form of housing. It's one of the, a couple of years ago we went past for the first time where class 2, so multi-units actually exceeded a single res for the first time. So the shift is on in terms of approval. As in approval. Yeah. So that trend is going to continue. You can see what's happening down the corridor. So it is a matter of government spending quite a lot of time on and quite a lot of resource in terms of both what happens once you've purchased and once you're in there, but also on the building and the compliance side of things. So that is, there's a major project on further review going on at the moment, which I've contributed resources to make sure that we improve the quality and the outcomes that we're seeing from builders.
Yeah. So, if I've got it right, if we've got the fire systems in place and they're operating effectively and the building is built to the construction code, it's designed to allow enough time for people to get out of the building. Looking at the audience, I think most of the people here tonight are lot holders. They're unit owners, they live, or they've got investments. I'm just wondering how many, show of hands, can remember an evacuation procedure being carried out in their building in the last 12 months? Let's say it's a plan. So it's an evacuation procedure. It's training so that people know what to do.
Can I just say something?
You're about to.
I'm a building manager. We manage 700 apartments in one site in Sydney where we did training in the last 2 weeks.
Yep.
Evacuations. So out of 700 apartments in 15 different buildings, we had 12 attendees.
Yeah. So, can I suggest to you that the reason that there are requirements of buildings to carry out evacuation procedures, to get annual testing of fire equipment done, is so that if there is a real emergency evacuation, that people know how to exit the building. As Craig has quite rightly pointed out, the construction code isn't about saving the building, it's about saving lives, and Andrew will say throughout this evening that the fire systems inside buildings are designed to provide sufficient time and oxygen supplies to allow people to get out of the buildings. Am I right there, Andrew?
Yeah.
It's not about saving the building? Yeah?
Correct.
Yeah. So Peter, when you're on your committees and you're thinking about, do I need to be doing this fire and evacuation procedure stuff, guess what? You do. The reason it's there is to allow people to understand if there is an evacuation, what to do. Because most people, if it's around dinner time, will actually not think it's a fire. They'll think that someone's burnt something and they've set the alarm off and won't actually think there's a fire. And I've been in a commercial building where the evacuation sirens were going off, and we were sitting there typing away at our desks thinking it's all fine. We thought, oh gee, it's going on for a bit long, maybe we should go out. And we didn't know the building was on fire until we started to walk through water going down the fire escape and started smelling smoke. So, we don't take it seriously, the risk of fire. We don't take the practice seriously. We don't take the testing of the panels, and if you're in a commercial building, the building owners will go to jail if they're not actually testing their buildings sufficiently, right? That's how serious it is. So if you're living in the building, it's just as important if there's a fire that you know how to get out of the building. Yeah? Peter?
Yes.
Why are we in the situation today when there are potentially thousands of buildings, and that's part of the problem? We don't actually know the scale of the problem, that have got these non-compliant building products on them.
Well, thank you, Ross. If I could just clarify the evacuation point, in 2010 there was a change to Australian Standard 3745 emergency planning, and it's a code of practice, and it's a nationwide requirement. So the change from it occurred in 2010, which came out in 2012, regard to changing the wording of all buildings became all facilities, and all people, or workers, the word workers became occupiers. So all occupiers in facilities are meant to have an emergency management plan in place, which includes signage and practice. So if you speak to a work health safety lawyer, I'm not sure if Colin's across this, they'll say that if you stand up in front of a court of law, the judge will say, what did you do to replicate or improve on, with an alternative solution, AS 3745, okay? So that's to do with the evacuation. With regards to buildings, we don't know. That's the short answer. We don't know which buildings have the cladding. We don't know how many buildings have the cladding. And I think the shortest, easiest process is to organise to have an audit done of the buildings to find out A, is it cladding, B, how much, what percentage, and then see if it's flammable cladding, what do we do from here? And that's when the fire engineer kicks in.
Can I just ask a question?
You are.
Just a question on that though. 1 minute we've had ACP for a while, and the fire test for that in Australia says it's compliant.
Yep.
And then now, since the Glenfield disaster, we're now saying that that test in Australia is non-compliant, and therefore, has anyone been given an update as to what the Australian government and state governments are doing to apply the new fire test that's supposed to impact on the Australian standards in the Building Code of Australia?
Andrew, that sounds like a question that is right up your alley.
So, yes, cladding was supposed to be non-combustible, and the test that was previously carried on cladding was a small-scale test, as where small pieces of the cladding was put into a little chamber and it was burnt to see if it exceeded, if the temperature rose by more than 50 degrees. And if
Four corners. That was the four corners test?
Yeah.
So that people have seen the four corners show?
Yes, that was AS 1530 Part 1. So that was a small-scale test. It didn't actually tell you how the cladding performed, but that was the standard that you had to comply with. Lots of cladding products that were on buildings didn't actually comply with that standard because it's too hard to pass that test, to be honest. So in the latest version of the NCC, the one with the amendment in 2016, there is the new full-scale fire test. So any new buildings being constructed with a cladding product on the outside is required to comply with that full-scale test. So suppliers are currently trying to get their products past that test and are frantically doing full-scale tests.
So Andrew, can we just clarify that people have seen the four corners, it was a small disc they put inside a furnace, caught fire very quickly. Full-scale test is effectively large panels in a built environment type format where they initiate a fire and they see how quickly the fire spreads up a full panel.
Yeah,
is that correct?
So effectively you build a room that has the fire load that you would expect in the typical SOU, and you have cladding panels that span about 6 meters above that, and you set fire to that and you measure the temperatures and you look to see how far spreads across that facade of the paneling. If it exceeds certain temperatures, it fails. If fire spreads left or right, it fails. If you have drop down or flaming droplets, again, that test fails. So that's the new test that is currently being in the new standard, the NCC 2016 Amendment 1.
So my then follow-up question is, if that's the new test and the majority of products in Australia has failed that test, 1 minute you've got compliant with building materials and 1 minute you don't. So therefore, what happens as far as a legal perspective and therefore an insurance perspective, you're now non-compliant with your building product on your building. So what happens, well, I think my next question, I suppose, goes to Colin. We've got that court case in Melbourne where the judge said it's the owner's responsibility. That set precedents. So what happens next?
Look, I think it's probably one of those questions to take partially offline, because I'm not going to sit here and go around in circles on legal advice. What the body builders need to do is work out where they sit. And like I said before, it's all about knowledge for me. Instead of getting the niceties of what codes say, what the owners need to know is, are we in, are we out? What we need to look at, our regulators, is how do we move it forward? And I'm sure people would like it all to happen yesterday, but having done 20 years of public service before going out into the private sector, it's a slow process, and we need some guidance. And I know in New South Wales they've just done some legislative change. I'm sure all of the other states are looking and seeing, and there's a MATS task force and all that type of stuff. So instead of, I think we're looking to blame somebody, or what do we do? I think we need knowledge as a bunch of owners, and then we need to look towards our experts to say, how do we fix it? And look to our government to say, help us fix it, or help us, I suppose, shoot someone at the end of the day. But how do we deal with this long term? I think that's really the thing to go through.
Great.
Okay, there's two things. We're talking about a panel which is deemed to satisfy, or deemed to, well, the building code does two things. It says you can use a product if it's deemed to satisfy. So most building goes that way. When you get into the code is also performance based, so you can have a performance solution. So you could use a product which in a deemed to satisfy situation is not compliant, but you can do some other engineering around it that would make it compliant with the performance requirement. So the performance requirement will says the things about spread of fire, and they could do other things to control for the risk. So it might not be. So this is what's happened in the ACT since we picked the issue with the combustibility issue of aluminium panels a bit earlier than everybody else, 2010, and every building's been referred to our fire brigade for assessment of the alternate. If you're not going to use the deemed to satisfy, you use what's called an alternative solution, and every alternative solution for building which used cladding was then submitted to the ACT Fire Brigade for their fire engineers to have a look at it, as well as ours, before it progressed. The codes in all the construction elements work forward. So think of it, an easy way to think of it, if you built a swimming pool in 1969, you didn't require a fence around it. And each time they did it, so the most recent upgrade to pool fencing was in 2010. But there is no retrospectivity. So if your pool was built before 1969, you can still have it without a fence. You may be a lunatic to do that, because there's a whole range of other things that might happen, or you might think that was smarter. But 2010 was what they call isolation fencing. So you can't use, because children, what they used to do was say, you can use a door with an auto close, but what we would find is the auto close doesn't get maintained properly. The auto close, kids walk through, drowned in pools. Happened a lot, so they now do isolation fencing. But that's not retrospective, it's always prospective. So same with each thing that happens in building tells you something. So something like lacrosse, something like Brennan, tells you that what you thought happened wasn't, you thought it might perform in a particular way, but it didn't. It performed quite differently, and the torch, aptly named, going up twice, tells you something both times about what panels will perform like in situ. Now, you can do all sorts of testing, but not, it's like crashing a 747. You don't tend to build one so you can, and most people don't build buildings, a 20-storey building, and they say, let's set it on fire to see what happens to the panels. We use fire, but when that one does happen, you learn something. We learned something and the code changed. So it's not that it was compliant today and it's non-compliant tomorrow. It complied with the standard on the day it was built, but subsequent information tells us we need to treat that risk differently. When insurance responds with pricing, what it's saying is the risk profile we thought we had was wrong, and now we've got a different risk profile. And until we find the mechanism to adequately say, have we controlled for that risk, go back and have a look and see what we did and what measures we would put in place that would make that risk, to reduce the risk. That's what we're seeing. We're in that phase at the moment. We've done, the ACT government is going through all its own buildings. We've surveyed all our own buildings. For an initial, we've come back, you will see, until they get a panel that can survive all the tests, you may see the architects return to brutalist architecture, a lot of concrete and glass, and my favourite style. Gets you away from that, but not everybody's. But you'll see that shift while they wait to see how they've managed it. But it's not the case that you're compliant one day and you're non-compliant the next. You applied with the code on the day the building was approved.
Can I perhaps draw an analogy, and I'll ask the panel to comment on this. Back in the 60s and 70s, asbestos was a favoured building product. It was, again, cheap, it was easy to build with, it was long, hard wearing, it was a good insulator, you could put it into sheeting, it was easy to apply, and then all of a sudden we discovered what the issues were with asbestos, and the response to that has been moving forward to ban the use of asbestos, and there are appropriate control measures in place now for identifying if asbestos is present and notifying people that might come on site that asbestos is present. Is it a reasonable analogy to draw that here is the new building product or the new asbestos of the current times we're in, that previously was thought to not be a problem, be a great building product, but now we're finding out that it may be not so great, and that we need to have a response as a result of that?
Certainly, from an insurance perspective, cladding is seen to be the current asbestos problem. Canberra had a problem down here with Mr. Fluffy. A lot of insurers don't, well, most insurers won't write properties with asbestos in it. Some do, but at a premium, a high premium. But certainly cladding's the current era of the equivalent of asbestos from an insurance perspective.
Yep. Eric, do you have a view on that?
No, not particularly, but I think it's more a technical question.
Yep.
And I agree. It is a new paradigm, this
Yep.
cladding thing, and we should see it that way. This is now, we're learning, and it's time for action. And it's not just action by regulators; it's action by executive committees and owners. They've got to start doing stuff, and I think that they need to check what is wrong, and then actually do something about it.
Yep. So Peter, when someone buys into an apartment, were they right to assume that the building's been inspected and approved and signed off right to occupy before settlement occurs?
Yes, Ross, we know that there's inspection and certification processes in place before people can occupy buildings. And I think the analogy you used with regard to asbestos is a good one, in that back in the day when we grew up in fibro houses, for those of you in the room as young as me, we were throwing it around the backyard and putting cricket balls through it and all that sort of stuff, and it wasn't until later we found out it was dangerous. But no one meant for that to happen, and the same as when someone came up with this cladding concept, it was brilliant. Architects thought, well, this is great, we can do some really good, attractive, cost-effective, long-term maintenance things with this stuff. And they, once again, didn't set out to cause harm. So consequently, it's not so much blaming the people that agreed for it to go up in the first place. It's now about learning and understanding from that, and move forward and find and deal with professional, experienced companies.
So Eric and Rob, from a strata management perspective, what would you be urging your owners corporations, your bodies corporate, to do so that they can address this? Because it seems to me that the common theme running is the lack of knowledge. The lack of knowledge is perhaps the starting point.
I think that really comes back to what I was saying before, which is that really strata managers, part of their standards, part of the way they operate, they should have a standard item in each agenda that discusses this particular issue. Whereas at the moment, I think it's very much driven by insurance considerations. Like, insurance companies are the ones that are wanting this knowledge. They want to see what their risk is. But I think now the time is for ECs to actually assess their own risk, not from the insurance perspective, but from the perspective of safety and money loss.
Yeah, certainly education is, in a number of areas, is probably one of the current issues for owners corporations, executive committees, lot owners. As I said before, there's so many unknowns about the physical environment that they live in, and cladding really just highlights that. You know, there was obviously a really strong push from my clients and probably most managers' clients when Grenfell occurred, and they sort of said, well, have we got any of this stuff? Do we need to panic? And since then, in my experience, things have gone a little bit quiet, and because the issue itself has gone off the boil, unless you've got some clients who are really digging their heels in and insisting on this information, you don't get a huge amount of engagement from your client base. You know, certainly every time we're dealing with an insurance renewal at the moment, the question does come up, have you got any of this cladding? And a few of the insurers at the moment are refining their questions, and they're sort of prompting a lot of information from you beyond, have you got cladding? It starts to look at, what do your fire systems look like? How tall is your building? Have you had it tested? Do you have your evacuation procedures in place? And that is driving a lot of the education for the lot owners and the residents, where they're possibly not interested in going out and sourcing that information for themselves.
And Craig, do you have anything that, other than the advice we've heard about action?
Yeah, just to let you know what's happening in the background, that's, you know, government's invisibility to everybody. So there's been a fortnightly, up until about 2 weeks ago, there's been a fortnightly meeting, teleconference of all the regulators nationally who are discussing the risk model, how to look at it, each of the jurisdictions. So every jurisdiction, given geography, our geography being the easiest to deal with. Western Australia's obviously got a much different geography to deal with. The types of buildings, some jurisdictions, Hobart doesn't have a lot of high-rise, surprisingly. So it depends where you are, how each jurisdiction's involvement, but you know, certainly New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland. So there's been a regular national look up to discuss the risk model and making sure that we don't run, you know, as Australia can, 8 different, well, there's 8 jurisdictions, 9 if you include the Commonwealth, so it's possible we can get a dozen different models out of how we might treat it. So we've been trying to avoid that and actually come up with a single risk model that all the regulatory entities across the country can agree to. So that's been happening at a fortnightly basis. That's now moved to a monthly basis. And within the ACT, I meet in my, I'm not in the role I'm in now, my normal role, I'm the Construction Occupations Registrar. I meet with the Fire Brigade and the policy people people who do building policy, and we meet fortnightly to discuss where we're at. So we have been doing things. The Fire Brigade's has developed an app, so when it goes out and is out on the ground, it's actually doing stuff. It's actually collecting information about buildings that it sees, so it's doing preliminary assessments. Does that building have cladding? Yes, no. Do we think it's ACPs, aluminium composite panels? Yes, no. So then marking them for further investigation, come back and have a look. I've also, that's been shared with my construction audit team, who are similarly starting to collect that information. At the same time, we've been much more intensive on the buildings that we own, that the Territory owns, and understanding what the risk looks like to them. So we might have, an example we might have if you can imagine a school that's got aluminium, this isn't the case, but say you've got aluminium cladding that starts 1.2 metres up the wall and goes, so you've got a bit of brick and then you start with your aluminium cladding. The risk of that in a primary school is slightly different to the risk in a high school with a high number of interestingly behaved boys. You might find that, I mean, much more interesting to see what could happen. So if you're
toilet blocks where they might be having the old lunchtime.
Yeah, so just to see, well, I've heard that can catch on fire. Do you reckon we can see what could happen? If it's at 1.2 metres from the ground, they could probably get there. If it starts on the second story, it's probably harder for them. So you look at different risks. So one of the questions is one of the schools was, well, what do we do? Well, the ground floor's all brick, and then it goes cladding. So that's a different risk profile as if the cladding was all the way to the ground. Out of the hospital, there's been one of the car parks has got some stuff on one of the columns as well. How much of a risk is that? Well, actually, it's there and it's around concrete, and it comes down to concrete. And concrete, you need a lot of heat to get it going. So it's probably not a bigger risk as if it was in a different location. So where we've got our own buildings and we can do that more intensively, that's giving us a base to actually test the model. Whether nationally we've agreed to this is what a risk model would look like, we can then go and apply that to our buildings and say, is that working? So that work is happening in the background. That will be shared with the rest of the industry once we're satisfied that we've got an effective risk model that actually will help people to understand what the risks are and how they can be managed. Because it's, to say to people, there's a risk, go to it, not particularly useful. Here's a risk, these are the mitigation strategies. So that's what we're working on. So it is actually happening, but in terms of maintaining a level of building that knowledge base so we don't go off half cocked about. Should have said something.
So Andrew, I'll take a question in a moment. So if fire engineers have done their job properly, they actually do a risk assessment model when they're determining whether the fire systems, with the knowledge of what the building products are going to provide sufficient time if there is a fire incident for people to get out of the building. So there is already risk profiling occurring with building design. That's what you do for a job, yeah?
Yeah, and I suppose, for new buildings, you obviously got to comply with the current NCC. If you deviate from that, you've got to demonstrate how or why. But in terms of these existing buildings that have cladding, I totally agree with what you're saying there. The idea is understanding, first of all, do you have a cladding on the building? Then understanding where is it on the building? And then doing a risk assessment to see, is it actually an issue or is it not an issue? And if it is an issue, what risk mitigation measures can you put in place to address that hazard? See, that's your starting point. And then there'll be some buildings that are more onerous. For us, hospitals is probably one of the top ones in terms of high risk, because you don't evacuate hospitals, you evacuate horizontally, so you move from one compartment to another compartment. You never want to actually evacuate the hospital. So if you've got a hospital that's got a cladding product that might be 100% polyethylene core, then you've got a problem, you've got a serious problem. Where if that was on another building, that may not be such a problem at all. So there's a risk profile that has to go with the occupancy, how you evacuate the building, what fire safety systems you have in the building, and what risk mitigation measures can you do to make the building safe effectively.
Yeah, sure. Okay. I'm just wondering, Colin, you were talking before we started about what the New South Wales government's response has been, which you have suggested might be considered by other jurisdictions as a possible one arrow in the quill to perhaps address the concerns that people have.
Yeah, look, they've had a look at a few things, and they're obviously on the national group as well. They've done a couple of things. One of the things they've done in New South Wales legislation for new builds, not so much for old builds, is put in a regime when you have a new build every year for the first, or whilst ever you've got warranty insurance, statutory warranty insurance, which is 6 years for New South Wales for major stuff. Every year, which is somebody else mentioned, I think Erik mentioned, every year there must be a motion on to deal with, do we have defects and how we're dealing with them. So that's one of the things that's already there, which I think is quite a good change. The other thing they're looking at also for new builds is the 2-year bond system, where there's a whole program being set up. So there's a new build, it's registered, it gets sold off, a certain percentage, at the moment it's 2%, is held back by the government, it's lodged with the government, and then there's a process where there's an independent inspector appointed after a period of time. They go and do an inspection, they list everything that's there that's non-compliant, it's not working, it's broken, whatever, and then the builder is given an opportunity to fix it. The inspector comes back, does a final inspection. If everything's fixed up, fantastic, and if it's not, then they can either access the bond or they can take the legal action on whatever the legislation is. So there's sort of two things that I've seen where the government is thinking about it, more so for new builds, and we're waiting for the old builds, but we've already said before, what I don't want to see is a pink bats thing where everyone panics. I'm not saying panic, I'm saying get your information. I'd hate to see that we go out and we get all of these so-called self-made experts overnight that see the opportunity to make a buck and doing the same thing, giving these, I think somebody said before, it was a $30,000 report that's absolutely bloody useless, and it's a technical term. So yeah, you want someone to come in that knows what they're doing, has experience in it, and gives you a report that you can work with. That is fine, not fine, need to fix a few things, need to fix a lot of things. So to me, it's the regulator helping out, but also us helping ourselves.
Yeah, so Rod, from any, we're almost at the questions. I'm sure your question won't go away. Rod, from an insurance perspective, again, I think we're starting to cover off on, you know, what people can do to address the concerns. What would you be advising your clients when they come to you with the buildings that they manage and the owners are saying, what have we got to do with insurance?
Well, from an insurance perspective, again, this is not new. Insurers have been on risk for these properties around Australia for years and years. It's the unfortunate events in recent times that have brought it to the forefront. So, as the guys have already said, you know, the types of things that will impact insurance are, you know, the height of the building. Generally, if it's higher than three stories, it's a bigger problem. The ignition points, you know, Craig mentioned how close it is to the ground. Fire protection that's in place. The vertical spread of the cladding, you know, and these are things that can be done if there's vertical spread of cladding and you take out sections every second level or something. That sort of mitigates some of the potential loss from an insurance perspective. The quantity, the percentage of the cladding that's over the building, they're the sorts of things that insurers are asking for. And as I said, it's not a new situation. The effect on insurance or the impact on insurance will depend from insurer to insurer as well, because you've got insurers like CHU who have been in the industry for 40 years and have the capacity and volume of business. They've got, I think, 100,000 properties that they insure. We're brokers for 25,000 properties around Australia. They have the capacity. It doesn't mean they'll write every single risk that's clad, but they have the capacity and perhaps a little bit of appetite than some of the other insurers who haven't been in the market as long, who don't have the same appetite or capacity to write higher risks. EPS, expanded polystyrene, we've seen in recent, from a commercial insurance, I'm talking non-strata, we've seen over the years lots and lots of properties go up. Recently the Murray Bridge meatworks went up. I think it was $300 or $400 million. The West Australian meatworks was flattened probably 10 or 15 years ago from EPS fire studying cool room to the
so you might know that as the cool rooms, the
panel
warehouses, the panels
that
are put together.
Aluminium paneling sandwiched with like surfboard. You know, it's not a new problem, and again, insurers are selective with these products. It's unfortunate, as I said, that it's been highlighted now with recent events, but it's time to look at it. And our advice to our strata managers and owners is, and I'll touch on it again a bit later, but be proactive. Don't put your head in the sand, as Erik said. It's not just a strata manager that needs to deal with this. Yes, there are manage your property for you potentially, but owners need to be proactive and get in and find out, you know, make the inquiries, get a report done if need be, well in advance of your renewal of your policy expiring, because the sooner you've got all that information, the better position you're in then for us as a broker or a strata manager if they're dealing directly with an insurer to negotiate terms for you. And as I said, the insurers are not looking to walk away from this. Most of them, you know, in fact all of them that we deal with want to help people. They just need the information, whether we like it or not, and you get it to us or to your strata manager sooner rather than later, you'll be in a far better position than leaving it to the last second when it comes to your renewal premiums. And you know, we haven't seen it yet. we haven't seen one property that has not been able to be insured. It's an emerging issue, so I'm not saying it won't happen. We've had a few in Melbourne that people have come to us and said, you know, we can't get this place, can you help us out? I guess because of our presence in the marketplace, we've been able to do it, but it was hard work. So I'm not saying again that it won't happen, but we have not seen one at this stage where the insurers won't insure them. They will work with us and they'll work with you, but they want the information.
Sure. And just one final comment from Peter before I open up, because I'm conscious of the time. We said that we would wrap up by it. So Peter, you know, perhaps from your perspective as someone that represents an organisation that actually goes and works with owners, corporation and bodies corporate about what they can do with managing their building, what would you suggest?
Well, managing defects, I'd recommend you get a defect report. If it's a new building, as Colin touched on in New South Wales, at least you've got up to 6 years. Generally, we would recommend that you work with your committee and your strata manager, work together to ensure that there's a register of defects created from year 2 to 5. I'm saying 5 to make sure that you come in short of the time span, because if there is a major defect, and depending on who built it and who the developer was, they might want to push time out to try and delay it so that it's past the 6-year period. Make sure that there's a proof, a chain showing how the original owner of the building, the developer or the builder, was informed of this all the way along. And because if you end up in a court, this is the sort of stuff you need to show that you gave them forewarning that there was a defect that you felt was courtesy of their building technique or the product that they used that didn't perform properly. And these things could be signs you could look for yourself as a committee. It could be doors, you know, if you've got a new building and doors aren't closing properly. If there's water pooling where water shouldn't be pooling, you've got a water ingress problem. But if there's a bubble in the paint, it's not like, oh wow, isn't that amazing? It's because water is coming down inside the paint and outside the superstructure. And then if you've got rust, if you look at some buildings, you'll see little rust marks on them.
Big rust marks.
Sorry? Big rust marks, and big rust marks lead to concrete cancer or spalling. So that gets in, the Rio starts to rust, the concrete shrinks away from it because there's less metal there, more water gets in, and it just continues. And then when you get people in, like engineers, or people like fire engineers who are on the same sort of money as supermodels, they don't get a bit less than $10,000. So then you're into the big picture. So that's why I'm thinking it's far better to maintain your property from the word go, and cheaper in the long run, and diarise and make a note of everything that's there, just in case you do have to show this.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that many of you are part owners of maybe a $100 million asset, and if it was a commercial building, there would be professionals doing what many of the committees and the owners' corporations are doing, but you need to think about it as a built asset that you need to maintain. And one of the things that my mother always says to me, which drives me nuts, the whole idea of penny wise, pound poor. And you know, I understand that there's cost of living pressures on everyone, but the reality is that there's sinking funds and capital work funds in place so that you can collect small amounts of money off everybody, so that when you do need to spend a relatively large amount of money, that the money's there or ready to go. I'm going to open the floor to questions now. I'm not sure if we actually, I think this gentleman had a question, but before we get there, I'm just wondering if we can volunteer one of the microphones off the karaoke stars at the front, and maybe Joel, you might be, you could be the microphone dude. So when you ask your question, can I ask you respectfully if you could indicate whether you are here representing the development industry and you won't get out the door, or if you're a builder, don't say you're a builder, you're a lot holder, or you're someone that works in the strata industry, just so that we might be able to get a perspective of where the question might be coming from. So over to you, sir. You've been, I think, keen to ask a question.
And make a little bit of a statement.
well.
Okay, well, I'll choose if you, so get to the question early on.
Well, I'm questioning, first of all, I'm a recently new EC member of a new development, 2 years old, by and large, reasonably well built. So we've presented with the message of being prospective, get on your hind legs and do something.
Yep.
So we went to the builder and we got the products, the cladding products, fairly promptly. We looked at the documentation on the products, and they say minimal transference of flames, etc. But then I hear that the standard is changing, the test standard is changing as well. We fire off to 2 areas in the ACT government. I think responsibly, here is our cladding. There's an inquiry, I believe, Craig, and also to your branch. No answer, so I send a new email saying, could you please acknowledge receipt? No answer. So we divulge to the insurer our cladding details rightly, and they want to know. We asked, is there a problem with this cladding? Too early to tell you. We'll tell you when we send you your next
notification. Yeah.
If you go to the legal fraternity, which we have, they say ACT government, and you can hear the context of the way it has been, they don't know fully either, so therefore the legislation isn't intact. I wonder if I go to a fire expert, with due respect to their knowledge and expertise, I think actually having run a management consulting company, I'll get a whole lot of caveats about the tests not done, depends on the circumstances. We'll come out and have a look at it, but there's no ruling on your particular cladding. Where do we stand? Because that's the reality that we're in right now.
I think, first of all, Craig's not here to defend the response times from the government, and
sure, no, I don't ask.
And I'm not asking. I'm sure you're not asking him to. From what I've learned, and Andrew, you can tackle me if I'm saying, because I'm actually asking you to confirm, but you can actually get a clear understanding of what the panelling is by actually looking on the back of the panel, right? That the panels have an international standard where they print the name and the production date and location, etc. on the back of the panel. The challenge that I understand with some of the panelling is the black core was polyethylene, and then they said the mineral content was okay if it was grey or white. So guess what? We started colouring the polyethylene so it was grey and white. So, you know, and then the names were what stood the panelling apart. So guess what we do then? We pick names that are really similar to the ones that are the correct ones. So, you know, you may think you've got a particular product, but you don't. But Andrew, am I correct by suggesting that the back of the panel should have the details of the panelling, and that may assist with answering the fire retardness of the cladding?
Yes, most panels actually have written on the back of it in print what the make is and what type of panel it actually is.
I've got all that.
Yeah,
I've got the specifications.
Yeah.
But are they the latest specifications or are they old ones? Even for a 2-year-old building?
Yeah. So that's where an assessment comes in. You can take very small samples, like 25 ml diameter sample. You can get that tested. It only costs a couple $100, and from that it'll give you an indication of what the product actually is and how flammable that product is. And from that, then you have a better understanding moving forward how you address that. It's not just the panel, it's also the wall construction behind the panel.
Sure.
So if you've got a block wall behind your panel, then you've got less of an issue. If you've got something that's like a flammable combustible insulation, well, then you've got more of an issue. So, you know, it's very hard to give, and every building is going to be individual and different, and every building has to be assessed on its own merits.
So I'm not sure if that's answered your question.
Yeah, no, I just raised it.
Yeah, no, and I think one of the themes that's come through this evening, and also with the other fora that we've had like this, is you know, knowledge is power. My school motto is Scientia est potestas, which is knowledge is power, and finding out as much as you can and being proactive about the issue before it comes to insurance renewal time is, I think, the clear message that's been coming from each of the panellists. We've got any more questions?
Just before we go on, if you, the second of the emails that you sent, can you forward that to me?
Yeah,
It's craig.simmons@act.au.
thank you.
It's SIMMONS.
I think it's spelled correctly.
I've got your note.
And photo. So this lady just here.
Yes,
Thank you.
it follows on from that. I'm also a lot older. We also are in a position where that we have minimal problems, but we do also know the name of the product and what it's purported to do. I'm just wondering, is there a very easily locatable list of where the cladding we should worry about and the cladding we don't have to be quite as concerned about? I believe there's quite a bit of difference between the fire ratings on the panels, but I've not seen anything other than the people's own ads that actually tell me whether this is a better or not quite as high quality panel.
From a different insurer's point of view, I can probably give you, I haven't got it with me now, but I can probably give you what I deem, I'm not a cladding expert, but what I deem to be more acceptable from an insurance perspective. But as far as your property goes and you know what's better or worse, I can't answer that, but insurance-wise I can show you what would deem to be more acceptable.
And I think also another message is it's not just the panel is present, it's bad, the panel's not present, it's good. It's you need to look at it in the context of the building. It's, you know, how far is it from the ground, etc. So there is no easy answer, but there are certainly some lists that I have seen about products that are full polyethylene, and there are others that have high mineral content, which means that they are less flammable. But there's enough heat, guess what? They're going to burn. Yeah.
Can I just say about that? I wrote one thing down for that when I was I couldn't remember the name of the damn thing, so I wrote it down. It's the Residual Hazard Identification Reporting Protocol. So that all sounds very lovely. So it's a Residual Hazard Identification Reporting Protocol. It's something that you can go and find out. And what there is now, there's different categories of product, depending on how much is in there, percentage-wise. And if you're looking to say, oh, are we in that? Is that the bad one? That might help you a little bit. Because if you go back to your builders, developers, experts and stuff like that, everyone, and because of me and my kind, are quite concerned about saying, oh, it's definitely this because they'll be liable if they say the wrong thing. So if you want research to say, okay, what can we look at? It's a big document, because I took a page of notes just having a look at it the other day. But yeah, that might give you a little, not comfort, but at least it'll give you some information and knowledge that you can go and say, okay, I mean, it's the same as when you buy a TV. We all go online and look at all the different types of TV, so we can speak with some confidence when we're talking to an expert, talking to our manager, talking to the government, whoever we're talking to, say, okay, I understand how this goes, so these are those categories, so that might help you a little bit.
Could you say that name again?
Residual
reporting?
Hazard.
Oh, hazard.
Yeah, Identification Reporting Protocol. So if you just type that in, it was in one of the reports. I'm on a couple of the government committees. It was in one of the things, and I remember it sparked my mind, and I went back and dragged it out of the report I had.
We've also found that owners and strata managers try to get information that we need for their insurance, and that have gone around in circles because they can't get the information out of the builders, as Colin just said. I'd urge you not to hang around and wait for that if you can't get it, because as Colin indicated, they're perhaps a little bit hesitant to give the information for legal reasons. But if nothing else, take some photos of the building, send them to your broker or to your strata manager to send to the insurer. You can't necessarily tell from a photo, but it gives a good idea. You get, you know, 4 sides of the building or something like that, of the exposure as far as quantity and spread of it, and it's a good start. So don't hang around waiting for, you know, plans or information from developers, because you won't always get it.
If I can just also point out on the back of your lanyard, there's a flowchart that we've done up
So that'll help with regard to, yes, we
This
have
is a plug for Peter.
plug for me, yes. And maybe or no. So you can follow that flow chart. If it's too small, which is for my eyes, let us know and we can send a larger version to you, email. We might even have some. Kathleen, do we have any of the larger information sheets here? No? Okay. Well, if you want to pass on your email address, we can email a copy to you.
Next question.
Yes, thank you. Question to Craig, if I can.
And you're a lot holder?
I'm a lot older and a member of the EC.
Okay.
You talked about the government having fortnightly conferences and now looking at monthly conferences, and also a single risk model being developed. Any insight on when that model may conclude, or timeframes on when we may see something come out?
I resist the temptation to put timelines on the government, but we certainly
sometime after today.
Yeah, certainly this year, and we're pretty close to being able to to understand where our own buildings are at, given that you should appreciate hospitals and schools and things like that was our initial focus. But I would expect that we certainly by mid-year would be able to be much more informed about what we can say.
Thank you. Any more questions? Okay. No, we've got a lady at the back and then we'll come down the front.
Yeah, I'm a lot older owner as well. I'm also on the EC committee. I just wanted to know if we've recently had a defects report done, but what I'd like to know is, and I don't know which gentleman would be able to explain it.
That's okay, we'll just pick one at random.
Yep, okay. Once a developer has created their plan and then passed that on to the builder, is there down the track we may have a defect or something? Where does the responsibility go? Is it with both the developer and the builder, or does that is there a line in there somewhere?
I think Colin's been to answer that, and then I think
they all looked at me that time, unfortunately. Looking for the floor. Yeah, we sent a bunch of people to start looking for the floor. Look, like I said at the beginning, I'll try and deal with this globally if I can, because I'll cover off on the people who've got New South Wales properties as well as ACT properties. In both, well, like I said, around Australia, we've got things called statutory warranties, which are warranties in legislation that apply to buildings, our residential buildings as they're built. We also have insurances, homeowners warranty insurances in all the states and territories, and they differ a little bit about what they cover, but fundamentally they cover in ACT and New South Wales, buildings under 3 stories have insurance. Okay, so in those two things, in the statutory warranties, which is the government, which is the legislative warranty that's imported into every contract for a residential building, there's, I call it major and minor. In New South Wales, major and minor. In ACT, there's structural elements and non-structural elements. So they sort of mean the same thing. So the big structural stuff, you get 6 years statutory warranties. The small stuff, the non-structural elements or the minor construction, you get 2 years. Okay, so there's timelines that sit around these things. So it's quite important as far as that goes. With your homeowner's warranty insurance, for the ones that are under 3 stories, okay, so the small builders, townhouses, 2-story walk-ups, those types, you've got 5 years in ACT and you've got 6 years in New South Wales. Okay. Now, picking up on what Chris said very early on about please don't wait, and I think also Peter said as well, please don't wait for 5 years, 11 months and 3 days to start going and getting a report. And it's one, like I said before, it's one of the good things in New South Wales with this new bond system that's come in, is the developer and builder have got to work together early on and within the first 2 years they're hoping, fingers crossed, that all of the minor scratches, defects, or if the big major defects they show up really quickly, like water ingress is a good one, that they're fixed in that first period of time. And then longer term, a lot of things settlement, and they need to crack and they need to do their bits and pieces and stuff like that. So that's why you've got the 6 year for the major structural stuff. Okay. Depending on which jurisdiction it is, you can take action against the developer and the builder together or independently. To access the insurance, it's the builder, and you can only access the insurance if the builder is dead, insolvent, like I'm sure you'd probably like to kill them, dead, insolvent, in administration, that type of stuff. So it's what they call a last resort scheme. Okay, so if you want your insurance, you go to that. I'll comment. As far as moving your matter forward, I've always said from day one, do what they're doing in New South Wales, but I've been saying this for 10, 15 years. The earlier you get reports, the better it is for you. Work with your builders and developers. Like I made a comment right at the beginning saying that nobody can build a good building. I've stood by that forever. But if they build something that's got scratches and breaks in it and they come back and fix it, that's fine. That's a good building. Okay? That's a good builder and a good building. So work with them early and get your experts involved in that early and move that along. So they're sort of the statutory regimes. The only other thing I can think of is notification periods, depending on where you are, 6 months in New South Wales, 3 months in the ACT. So if you find a defect or you get your report, you need to give it to all the developers and say, guys, here's our report. Picking up what Peter said before, have your running list, tick things off as they're fixed. As more things come in, add those more things in, and get the experts, whatever it is, cladding, or it doesn't matter what it is, waterproofing, whatever, and get those things done. The thing they've done in New South Wales, I said earlier, is they've determined by legislation that cladding is a major defect. Chris, I'm not sure whether they've done it. You haven't done it yet, no. That would be my suggestion, because what you don't want to do is what was happening in New South Wales and in Victoria, is that they were starting to commence cases and builders are saying it's not major defects, so therefore your building's 4 years old, I don't have to do anything about it. So at least, it's probably one of the things they chat about their fortnightly meetings is, guys, New South Wales took the jump and said, look, we'll make it a major defect, we'll cut all of that rubbish out and lawyers making money. So that's done, so it's a major defect, so we've got 6 years to deal with it.
Craig, do you want to add some?
Yeah, we've got, so the answer to the question is it's always the builder. Sometimes the developer is the builder. Yes. There has been a separation in the market where some of the larger developers have stopped building and have now contracted to professional building companies to do that. So that's been a shift in the market over the last few years. The other thing about the Construction Occupations Licensing Act is the reach back is 10 years against the actual anybody who is licensed to undertakes licensable work is responsible and can be pursued by the registrar for up to 10 years. Now the 10-year period starts on the day the certificate of occupancy and use is issued, given that Michael Conduras kindly took that to the High Court to get it decided, but that is the case. So it's 10 years, not 10 years from the date that the work was done in the construction of the building, which is what he tried to argue, because we did get, it was within the 9th year, and he said, well, actually, I did that on the first week of the build, so, you know, if that work was finished, well, they had to get the rest of the building out first. So the High Court was clear on that for us, so it's 10 years from the date on which the building is finished. The building is finished on the day the certificate of occupancy and use is issued. The registrar has up to 10 years to commence the action. Now, it may take years after that to solve, but there's a 10-year period. So, but once again, once you're past 5, the debate becomes, was this about the original failure to do something correctly? In that case it was, because it had been identified within 18 months and patch jobs hadn't worked. But if you're in a debate about fair wear and tear, Canberra's reactive soils are particularly different. It's a particular issue. but buildings move here more than others. The Millennium Drought took a lot of water out of the soil, and buildings tightened up, and 2010 when it rained. It was one of the record years for rain, 2010, and buildings leaked like sieves because they hadn't actually experienced that level of rain. But the next thing that happened is the clay soils got filled back up with water and they expanded. And so there was cracking and a whole range of other things took place. So you have to be aware of what the climatic cycle does in Canberra. It does behave differently to the other jurisdictions around that. But the reach back's 10 years, that's always going to be the builder.
Okay. I think there's a gentleman here with a question, but I'll come to you after the man with the microphone, and then we'll wrap it up because I'm conscious everyone wants to get home. So
this is a follow-up from the latest question in front of me. I'm a lot owner. I understand Colin's answer about the builder's insurance for the 3 stories. Who is responsible for the statutory warranties for over 3 stories or 4 stories and above? And I'll have a follow-up.
Yeah, because what Chris was saying is talking about the authority of rectification orders is the 10 years. It will be the builder in that instance.
Okay.
If you step outside that, there's been lots of cases going around Australia about taking on developers, certifiers, all of the other plumbers, all the other bits and pieces.
Okay. So what happens when the first builder goes into administration?
The second one takes over.
The second one takes over, goes into administration. The third one doesn't come in as a builder, but comes in as a property manager, and the developer goes into administration 6 weeks after selling.
Apart from selling and getting the hell out of there.
Yeah.
Look, that's come up a few times with us, and that unfortunately is one of those case by cases because the argument is really simple. I didn't do that work. My building, I'm the second guy in the middle, I didn't do that work, I don't know what you're talking about. And trying to get documentation is quite tough. And I've seen things like photographs from people that were driving past, people that bought off the plan, were so excited and they took all these happy snaps as they went along to see where the building was at. That's been helpful for us. That's a really complex one, but that will be the defence. I say I didn't do that part of the work. And unfortunately, a lot of times you actually commence action, seek rectification orders, or do something, and through the court process end up with some sort of discovery or if they're very confident. I've got one running at the moment in, I think it's in New South Wales, Victoria, I'm not sure. I think it's New South Wales, where that's exactly the issue, and we've under Simmons sought all of their site notes to say, okay, well, if you say you didn't do the work, prove you didn't do the work. Otherwise, we just have to assume that you did do the work.
But if they're in administration, they have no money.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we've got one administrator, and the builder that is still around, who was the second, in my case was the second builder, it is a New South Wales case, the second builder said they didn't do it, and we're going, okay, well, where did you take over from? And we're now saying, okay, you've got to prove it now, and the courts have issued the summons to produce these documents. So I'd like to see what that
so
goes.
why don't you two talk afterwards?
Yeah.
Gentlemen down front.
I'm a unit owner here in Canberra. We're in a 10-year-old building, but I'm pleased to say, Craig, we're a good builder, minimal defects. We've got an active EC and we've got a well-planned sinking fund, and it's loaded with money, and so we're getting along quite well. I guess I'd just like to thank everybody here because a lot of good information has come here, and I'd hope that all new ECs avail themselves and put themselves out to get this.
Particularly if they're not retired and have got real jobs.
Yeah. So the point that I'd just like to get to though, what I do despair about though is seeing rust running down buildings and all of those other things that used to be in the insurance industry once. So I'm despairing about, not for myself so much, but for the young couples who are buying these units. They're not going to make money out of them. They're falling apart within 4 or 5 years. And so I'm just wondering from the insurance point of view, when does it come time that you say, well, we're not going to take a particular class of building? from a strata management point of view, we might say the work and effort we put into this, it's all grief. We won't take those. In other words, before we form contracts with people, we'll have a real good look at these people and how can we then take some of the money that's going into rectification, what we're talking about here, to get that up front and put it into more building inspections and tighter control on the process. So I'd be interested to know what you think about that.
And we'll work on peace in the Middle East after we answer that question. Yeah.
Look, insurers, when they're dealing with properties that perhaps multiple lots, won't walk away from insuring them unless they really have to, because that benefits a lot of people. As I said earlier, that they really want to work with people to get or retain the insurance on the property, particularly with renewals. New business, they might look at them different. But if a building does become uninsurable, as I said, we haven't seen it yet, but if they do, it's all sorts of problems for office bearers. The sale of the property, you're in trouble with the financiers, all the owners, because it's an uninsured building. There's legislation problems. There's office bearers problems where potentially there's office bearers on an EC if you've been tardy in getting onto this and it does become uninsurable. Potentially there's a case that gets a committee to need to get to that stage, I don't know much more to say, but yeah, I think again my point is people just need to be proactive and get onto this early and hopefully that doesn't happen.
Okay, it's right on 8 o'clock and I know people are looking at their watches. Just before we do the Lucky Door Prize, and each of you in the room, even though many of you didn't put a business card in, has a chance of winning, because I put my business card under one of the seats and there's not at the front. Sorry, it's not at the front. So they're underneath one of the seats in the room is my business card, and the person that has got my business card under their seat, Kathleen at the back has a bottle of Verb Clico and some double passes to the movie. So you might want to all have a look underneath your chairs to see whether my business card is under your chair. It's in the front of the frame. I know where it is, see. I think everyone should look.
Come up with chewing gum.
No, it's not actually, it's actually under the chair. You need to feel for it at the front of the frame.
Rob.
Yes, it's you.
I think I have your card.
Yes, you do. So before you go, can I just say some thank yous? First of all, thank you to all of you, because you've come along tonight because you want to find out what you need to do. So when we give the round of applause, you're also thanking yourselves. I'd like to thank the sponsors of this evening who have paid for the venue and the catering and the arrangements for this evening. So that's Lannock Strata Finance, and they're one of the few organisations in Australia that actually loan money to strata communities if they don't have sufficient funds. There's the great company Solutions in Engineering. There's also Grace Lawyers and BCB Strata Insurance Brokers. But also for all of the panellists who have come along this evening, so Peter, Rod, Colin, Andrew, Erik, Rob and Craig, can we all give them a round of applause to So Neil,
yeah,
you've got some stuff to pick up from the back before you leave.
Wonderful.
Travel home safely. We didn't need to use the fire exits. Remember, gents on the right, ladies on the left. Enjoy the rest of your evening and travel safely. Thank you.